Welcome to the Elvis Presley Channel. Elvis found her exactly like his mirror, with whom he could share his vulnerable side, and people labelled her the female version of Elvis. Despite that excellent compatibility, she was, however, not the one he could choose to marry. Why Elvis would always have chosen Priscilla over Ann-Margret. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you're new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to my channel. They were soulmates, yet not perfect for each other. The king of rock and roll, Elvis Presley, was known for his unique personality and complicated relationships. One such example was his relationship with Ann-Margret. While filming Viva Las Vegas in 1964, they both shared a strong bond, and they seemed to have all the elements for an enduring relationship. Their similar personalities made them believe that they were true soulmates, but eventually he chose his long-time fiancée Priscilla over Ann-Margret. Though he couldn't marry Ann-Margret, he never forgot to cherish her success throughout his life. For the rest of his life, Elvis used to send Ann-Margret flowers in the shape of a guitar whenever she opened her show, and later confessed that he still loved her. Here a question arises: if he really loved his Rusty that much, then what made him marry Priscilla? As a matter of fact, he was already committed to Priscilla, and he fulfilled his promise to marry her, but is this the only reason he couldn't marry Ann-Margret? Probably not. The main contributing obstacle was Elvis's mindset about gender roles. He wanted a young wife like Priscilla, who could live happily as a housewife with him, and Ann-Margret was not the one. She was mature, independent, and career-oriented. On the other hand, Priscilla was young, naive, and not from show business. However, Priscilla was not supposed to be like that forever. Let's find out what those other traits of Elvis's personality were that stopped him from marrying Ann-Margret and made Priscilla tired of him. In 1964, Viva Las Vegas, directed by George Sidney, was one of the most significant projects that Presley ever did. Viva Las Vegas works primarily because Presley was partnered with someone who could go toe-to-toe with him, and the audience felt something magical in the romantic relationship. From the first moment they met, each recognized a kindred soul in the other. They both said words to that effect. Ann-Margret, as the swimming instructor in Viva Las Vegas, attracted Elvis in a way that every single person around them noticed that there was something different, something real in their performance. He was always portrayed as a cool guy surrounded by women, and while he was never less than entertaining, it's that heat he brought to the table that was so watchable and undeniable. No doubt Elvis was a stunner, but how she would watch him in the movie, how she gloried in him, made him come alive, made him explode with even greater heat, the kind of heat that he couldn't hide. They were so in sync they were like clones. They both discovered many things they had in common. In addition to music, they shared a passion for motorcycles, a love of family, a desire for privacy, a devotion to God, and late-night talks. Everything they loved about life was reflected onto them, as though they were both mirrors of each other. Even when they danced, they would exhibit perfect synchronization. After the first recording session with Ann-Margret for the film, Elvis confessed that they moved the same, that their impulses were the same. They both felt the music in the same spontaneous way. He said that it was such a pleasure for him to play like that with someone who anticipated his moves, reflected them, and brought her own fire to the process. A love affair sparked between the two that encompassed their lives entirely. Ann-Margret revealed that she and Elvis were soulmates, but were both emotionally dependent. Before long the pair had hit it off and became inseparable. Ann-Margret became a regular member of Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia, and spent as much time with the king as possible. Looking back on the relationship, Ann-Margret explained their similarities. Ann-Margret wrote in her memoir, My Story, that she and the king were destined to be together. She said, "We were indeed soulmates, shy on the outside but unbridled within." But there was a darker side to the connection Elvis and Ann-Margret shared. She explained, "We both lived on the edge, and we both were self-destructive in our ways. In many ways, both of us, despite fame and whatever else we achieved so quickly, had remained very childlike and emotionally dependent. However, the spirited lovers could not help but be drawn to one another. Ann-Margret said of her relationship with Elvis, "We both felt a current, electricity that went straight through us. It would become a force we couldn't control." Despite that special bonding with Ann-Margret, eventually Elvis chose Priscilla, a girl whom he promised to marry when she was just 14. The two wed in 1967, which was unexpected for most of Elvis's friends. Everyone thought that Elvis would choose Ann-Margret. They were beautiful together. They shared energy for life that made you feel happy for them. Elvis was very fond of her and loved to make her laugh. However, Ann-Margret knew that they had to break off their affair. Presley planned to marry Priscilla, and Ann-Margret respected him for upholding his obligations. "There were other factors in Elvis's life that forced him apart from me, and I understood them," she said. "Elvis had always been honest with me, but still it was a confusing situation. We continued to see each other periodically until we had dated for almost a year. Then everything halted. We knew the relationship had to end, that Elvis had to fulfill his commitment." They parted ways when rumours about the engagement began making the news after Ann-Margret was misquoted. Presley cleared the air, noting that the actress had only admitted to being in love with him, but the rumours of an engagement were false. Even though Presley had cleared the air, it was already too late, as the rumour had gotten to Priscilla Beaulieu. Shortly after the press onslaught, Elvis Presley broke off the affair. Eventually, Elvis stopped returning Ann-Margret's calls. Ann-Margret was mentally prepared for that. She knew that her relationship with the king couldn't last due to his engagement. He then returned to Graceland to propose to his then-girlfriend, Priscilla Beaulieu. Elvis fulfilled his promise to Priscilla, and they tied the knot in Las Vegas on May 1st, 1967. Yet it was not the only reason behind their breakup. If Elvis wanted to marry Ann-Margret, he could have married her despite whatever the press were portraying. Strangely, some people claim that Elvis was forced to marry Priscilla. Priscilla's parents might have pressured Elvis to marry, but Elvis was not the man who would do anything he didn't want to do. Though he loved Ann-Margret, he was typically described as standard and old-fashioned in his beliefs regarding gender roles. In the meantime, Ann-Margret was dedicated to her achievements. Despite having similar personalities, Ann-Margret was not the woman Elvis was looking for. Ultimately, Elvis would have always chosen Priscilla over Ann-Margret. According to Sonny West, Elvis's previous bodyguard, Elvis considered ladies ought to be submissive to adult males in passionate relationships and should not prioritize their careers. West was not the only one who claimed that Elvis had a conservative mindset about women's roles in society. Linda Thompson, Elvis's girlfriend from 1972 to 76, claimed in her 2016 memoir, A Minor Detail called Daily Life, that she was not positive about marrying the king because she did not want to close up in the wife penalty box. "He told me that the wives didn't go on tour and that they typically only got to the Vegas engagements for the opening or the closing demonstrates," she wrote of Elvis's limitations on a wife's position in his daily life. His traditional line was, "You never require your spouse to work with you, so the wives should stay at home, but the girlfriends can be brought to travel." So it was apparent that the reason was not just his commitment to Priscilla. The more potent reason for him to choose Priscilla was his opinion regarding women's role. That was the reason he ignored his magical compatibility with Ann-Margret. Some in Elvis's entourage believed choosing which one to marry was a difficult decision for him. "I've always said it was a toss-up between Priscilla and Ann," said Presley's cousin, Billy Smith. Marty Lacker weighed in. "I knew Elvis had to decide between them, and I thought if push came to shove, he would choose Ann." And according to George Klein, while everyone knew he was absolutely smitten with Priscilla and sincerely wanted to build a life around her, it was also obvious that he was honestly overwhelmed by the feelings he had for Ann-Margret. If it really was a difficult decision for Elvis, it was made easier by the stark contrast between the choices. Margaret was a completely different kind of woman from Priscilla. Ann-Margret wanted a definite commitment from Elvis. She had her own career, which she wasn't about to throw off for anyone, and more importantly, she was independent and wouldn't take orders. Few women Elvis became involved with had that kind of courage and sense of self, at least in the initial phase. With a few significant exceptions, Elvis never lacked for women willing to oblige him. Ann-Margret wasn't that type, and Elvis recognised that he'd never be able to apply the control over her that he had then over Priscilla. It certainly came down to a choice between Priscilla, someone Elvis believed he could cut off miles away whenever he wanted to enjoy his freedom, and Ann-Margret, who challenged him, if only because her life didn't revolve around his. It was a challenge he never rose to with any woman, which is disastrous. Elvis himself confessed, "I really care for her, but under the circumstances I really don't think it would be a lasting thing." Elvis then explained what he believed was the main obstacle to continuing with Anne. "Women should stay at home and raise a family. That's how I was raised." He further said, "I'm committed to Priscilla, and some day I'll live up to my commitment. Priscilla reminds me of my mom. She wants to be a mother and raise children. She doesn't want showbiz." His friend and Memphis Mafia member Lamar Fike said, "I think Elvis would have married Ann-Margret in a New York second, but he made it clear he'd do it only if Anne quit show business, and that was not possible for a career-oriented woman like Ann-Margret." Ann-Margret's career was skyrocketing at the time. She made a splash in Hollywood after appearing in Bye Bye Birdie, before taking the lead role in Viva Las Vegas. Before long, she had her own Las Vegas residency slot. On the other hand, Priscilla was only 14, seemingly a mouldable child, when Elvis, then 24, met her. He was attracted by her innocence, which offered him the opportunity to mould her into the ideal marriage partner some day. When she moved into Graceland in 1963, Elvis began controlling every aspect of her life, including her appearance and relationships with others inside and outside his inner circle. Throughout the marriage, Priscilla said she felt controlled by Elvis. The constant inspection made Priscilla feel like Elvis's doll, his own living doll, to fashion as he pleased. In an interview with the Jonathan Ross Show, Priscilla said she felt robbed of her teenage years during her early years with Elvis. "You start losing yourself and who you are, and people always wanted to know, and still do actually, want to know about him, and I do understand it a lot better now than when I was younger," Priscilla said, per Huffington Post. "I was kind of lost, really, in who I was earlier in my life. I really didn't have any teenage years." Though he was an overprotective and controlling husband, he couldn't stop himself from being a womanizer. Priscilla and Elvis welcomed their first child, a girl named Lisa, just a year after getting married. While Priscilla was still pregnant, rumours began to swirl about the next woman supposedly on Elvis's mind. Ultimately, Priscilla grew tired of Elvis's ways and finally broke free from Elvis's stifling control. The couple divorced in 1973 after 6 years of marriage. Later, she went on to be an accomplished actress and a successful businesswoman who preserved Graceland and Elvis's commercial legacy following his death. On the other hand, Elvis remained a loyal friend of Ann-Margret, though she was happily married. She was always on his radar. It didn't work out between Elvis and Ann-Margret, but for the rest of his life she was in the deepest part of his heart. The question then is, if Elvis had married Ann-Margret instead, would the marriage have lasted, and if so, could she have inspired him to lead a happier, longer life? It's evident that Elvis and Ann-Margret shared a relationship of deep affection, trust, and respect that lasted until Elvis died in 1977. But to return to the question at hand, if they had married, could it have survived, and could she have saved Elvis? I think the answer should be no to the first question, which makes the second question a hollow one. In addition to Elvis's choice of women, what would have destroyed an Elvis-Ann-Margret marriage the fastest, however, would have been Elvis's persistent womanizing. According to Marty Lacker, Elvis never stopped seeing other women, even when he was dating Ann-Margret. I think he thought he had to do it like it was expected of him. Though Ann-Margret stated that her career was not an obstacle in their relationship, her show business career would indeed have been a divisive issue in a marriage with Elvis. Marty Lacker knew how difficult it would be for Elvis to watch his wife's movies. He couldn't have handled it. In marriage, their respective show business obligations would have kept Elvis and Ann-Margret away from each other for considerable periods. Furthermore, Elvis's record of flirtatious ways with women, both in and out of marriage, makes it almost certain he would have been unsuccessful in married life. Ann-Margret may have accepted it as Elvis's girlfriend, but it's hard to imagine she would have put up with it as his wife. Elvis chose what he thought he wanted from marriage, but little did he know that his personality would not lead him to a happy married life ever. Since it's unlikely then that a marriage between Elvis and Ann-Margret could have survived, she, like Priscilla, would not have been around to help guide Elvis to a happier, more fulfilling life. In the end, Ann-Margret was fated to stand on the sidelines, along with the rest of us, and watch as a person she loved slowly self-destructed. What happened between Elvis and Ann-Margret is a well-told story. Both characters told their versions in detail. But what about Priscilla, who was also part of this affair? Very much so. From this video you'll get to know how Priscilla felt about Elvis's affair with Ann-Margret.